Hello everyone, and welcome to Phoenix Gaming. Today we are going back old school. One of the oldest games in the Euro collection, as far as I'm concerned, is Catan. I actually think it's officially called Catan these days instead of Settlers. I don't actually really know, to be honest. But we've got these four players. We've got Phil in the red in the top left. He's the first player. Rachel, orange, top right. Brent, who you might recognize from our other videos, because he ends up winning this game. He's in the bottom right, and then Chris in the bottom left. Phil and Chris you might recognize from the Acquire final, which Phil ended up winning. So interesting seeing two players from Acquire come on over to Catan. Must be funny for them to see each other too. Without any further ado, let's before I dive in, on the bottom left here, I'm trying something. I'm doing this mostly live. I tried to watch through this game, but this is a 2-hour game of Catan, which is mind-blowing to me. It seems like a really long time to play Catan for. And I started watching the first 20-30 minutes of this video, hoping that it would make it very obvious what the trades are by listening to the recording, but it's clear that the commentators there are going to struggle as much as I am seeing some of the specific cards being passed in the trade. So we're going to try to keep on top of it, and we'll see how it goes. Let's go ahead and get started here with Phil's first placement. I'm going to start my video on the other channel as well in case I need to check anything else up. And Phil's got a couple neat options here, and he goes ahead and takes what is one of my favorite kind of things to start off with, which is a rock-heavy strategy, or I'll call it or, probably rock most of the time, but as a rock or heavy strategy in the... We're going to call it the bottom of the board because of the way that the numbers are facing, even though the board is kind of rotated 90 degrees from any of the players. I guess it's the bottom of the board from the judge's perspective, so we'll leave it at that. And what we have here is that Phil is basically going to be the best at building cities, which I think is one of the things in this game that really is... how you can transition from the mid to the late game. I think that cities are a really nice... they're just kind of like a control aspect of this game, right? Like if you have control of the ore, it's really the only way to build up. And there's just too much limitation in terms of building out. Whereas with the cities building up, you get to double up on the spaces that are the best, because generally when you're building out, the crappier spaces exist already there. And by building out, I mean building the roads and settlements. And so I just find city strategy to be more powerful. Rachel chooses to do something a little bit more even keel. And I actually also really like Rachel's play. She places on the 8 brick. The 4 sheep and the 3 rock are okay. But if you notice, brick is in short supply this game. There's a 2, 11, and an 8. And so she's really going to corner the market on brick there, which I think is a pretty powerful place to be. In fact, when we're assessing this board, we notice that always I look first at brick and ore because there's only 3 of those tiles. So 8, 2, 11 of brick, 8, 4, 3 of rock. There's going to be a dearth of hard, heavy things this game, with the exception of the players who maybe are sitting on those dominant places. On the other hand, there's going to be a lot of wheat. 6, 6, 5, 11 means that there's going to be just tons and tons of wheat in this game. As usual, there's a decent amount of sheep because sheep tends to be the resource that is less used across the purchasing cards. So there's a 4, 5, 10, and 3 there. And then for wood, there's a decent amount with 9, 9, 10, 12. I'll maybe come back and talk about sort of an abundance commentary a little bit later, but let's go back to the fact that Brent placed up in the top right of the board there, grabbing a spot that just kind of has a little bit of everything. It's not very good at brick, but like we said, there's really nowhere else you're going to get brick on this board. So if you're going to get brick, that's going to be the place to get brick. Now that Rachel has kind of nabbed it, it gets him access to wheat, which is going to be plentiful, but you still need it, and a pretty solid sheep spot. So he's just kind of going for a nice middle of the road play here. And then Chris always has the most fun choice, where he gets to choose 2 in a row here to do some shenanigans with. And so usually when I'm doing the 2 in the row, and especially on a board where we're going to be like short on maybe brick and rock, I'm considering what my options are for ports. And there's a little bit of a glare on the board But I think it looks like the wood port is on the right side of the board. The brick port is on the top side of the board. I'm going to guess the wheat port is on the bottom of the board there. Kind of in a really awkward position. It'd be nice if you could grab that wheat port and the 8 rock 10 wood. But of course, Phil's settlement is kind of obstructing that possibility there because there is so much wheat in this game. I can't help but wonder if Phil's placement probably was just focused on placing on the good spot, but the fact that it blocks that wheat port, also a pretty big deal. The ore port is right below where Phil is, which is certainly a nice consideration additionally for why you would want to go on those double ore spaces. And then it looks like on the left side of the board is the sheep port. So you could certainly go for some kind of sheep port strategy in this game, maybe placing on that 10-9-2 on the left side of the board, the sheep wood brick, and then kind of building out to that port, that 5 sheep 2 brick spot on the port looks like a decent option for a long-term build. Plus, as your second building, you would get a road. So if I was in Chris's position, I'd certainly be considering that. He does exactly that. I think I would maybe make it my second house because I like having having roads at the beginning is just really nice for racing people. It is a little more awkward in fourth seat because if someone builds a road like right into where you're building a road, that can be really unfortunate. But having the threat of like, if it gets to my turn, I'm going to extend out and I'm going to build my second road can be really valuable. And then Chris makes a very bold play here by placing on the triple wheat. I would not have placed there. He's not going to get to the wheat port, so if anything, he's looking at getting to a 3-1 port, but he's not really close to any 3-1 ports. He certainly might end up building through the middle here, but I think that's pretty ambitious. So I think I maybe would have placed actually kind of like where Brent placed. I mean, he doesn't need the extra wood, but he does need the ore. I think maybe placing on like the 4, 5, 11 and just taking some lesser numbers in favor of getting some ore. Or even the like, if he just shifts his house over one space to the 6, 3, 11 in the middle of the wheat there, the 6, 11 of wheat and the 3 of ore. It's a little bit worse, but it gives him a little bit more diversity of resources. Brent then goes ahead and just basically goes for the full wheel. He's got access to every single resource. He took that spot up really, really quickly. He has at least one of every resource on the board. And Rachel's next placement, she gets a second to last placement on a 5, 9, 10, which is like, I think, pretty tough to do. The 9, 10 is admittedly, they're both wood, and having like lots of redundancies there is not the best, but I mean, she's going to be the one with brick. Like, having access to multiple avenues of wood is good for her. She maybe has the choice of going to a wheat port later in the game, which she's not going to get a ton of wheat, but might be able to filter or make trades with other players if like indeed a bunch of 6s are rolled. The kind of funny thing is that other 6 of wheat, no one is on it currently. Except for in the long term, probably Brent will build down there. And you see most of the players are kind of facing their roads outwards, which I think is just kind of the like nice conservative play, right? You don't have to worry quite as much about folks coming in and blocking your path along the way. I'm going back to Chris's because that triple wheat thing just seems very odd to me. And that road there, I mean, I guess he could be going for longest road that kind of like cuts down the middle. Obviously, he doesn't know where the other players are going to go, but I think that 4-9-3 spot was pretty reasonable for folks to take. I guess maybe he was thinking someone would take the 6-9-3 spot instead, and then he could like race to the 4-9-11. But that's the thing too, is I think that 4-9-11 spot actually totally valid on its own. Like, that would be someone's second placement for sure. Let's update this. Rachel's gonna get 2 wood and wheat, and let's assume maybe Chris did not do triple wheat. I'm just gonna assume that he actually placed that in a sane way. No brick for Brent, and then wow, Phil makes a really bold play here. Might be able to tell that bold is my framing for. I don't think it's very good. So he's sitting on the sheep port there, which is valuable in and of itself. And I guess that he just really values that sheep port. But what a crap starting location. 11 here. Let's go, Brent. That brick is a huge, huge deal. And then we get a sheep for a wheat for Chris. He's missing out on a resource. The 2 is nearly a dead resource. And I could see that there's there's not necessarily a bazillion other choices, but I can't help but think that I would have chosen the 3, 10, 11 if I was in Phil's seat, the one kind of right in the middle of the board there. Because then you can also like build towards the desert and maybe get the 10, 5 of sheep or like race for it. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, I missed what we rolled. I can tell immediately there's absolutely no way I'm going to keep track of all these resources. It's just not possible. We're going to go ahead and dump this. Let's be real. All right. So it looks like Chris ended up rolling into a handful of wheat. So he's just got a pile of stuff. Maybe rolled some 5s and 6s. Looks like he picked up a brick. Oh, he started with the brick, of course. So, I mean, I guess what he's doing is building a road. The best spot for him to build to is that 3, 10, 11, but the 5, 10 is right there. So I imagine you do that and then maybe kind of hope to loop around. I mean, he's going to struggle to get the brick. Chris, I think, is in the toughest position of this game by a fair margin at this point. Phil blocking him on that sheep port was just pretty backbreaking for him. He seems to be like so chummy. Like, look at him. He's kind of like having like a laughing face about it. Maybe he just looked at the board and like said, 4 seats going to be a little tough here, so I need to do something risky. And Phil said, no, I can't let you do that. Brent builds the solid road here, going out into kind of where we'd expect him to go. He doesn't build towards the wood port on the right side of the board. That's definitely going to come into play. Not definitely, but I think quite likely to come into play later in the game. As I think wood's use tends to dry up kind of mid to late game, and Brent is already sitting on the 9 wood spot and will eventually be sitting on the 12 wood, which is, I guess, not really too much, but I think Brent is a reasonable block here. But I think stealing from Chris seems like some salt in the wound. He must be looking for a particular kind of resource. I mean, he has a brick, so maybe he was fishing for wood. And he thought that Chris had an extra one. That's what it is. Must be. Because otherwise, it seems a little extra at this point. A lot of 5s rolled here, so lots of wheat and sheep coming into the game. Just kind of an excessive amount at this point in time. And one thing I really appreciate about these players is they don't kind of dither around about these like half trades. They know exactly what they're here for, and so if they roll the dice and they don't have appropriate resources, they're like, okay, it's the next person's turn. I'm good to go. They're moving faster than I can even kind of consider the situations of this game, and I think that kind of belies their strength and their experience in the game. So is Brent offering up brick and wheat for something? He doesn't have extra. Oh no, he has enough stuff to make. He has enough stuff to make a settlement. So we must have rolled another 11 in here, and I missed it somewhere. Huge, so huge. I mean, obviously he's off to a completely running start here. He gets on that 6 wheat there, so now every time a 6 is rolled, he gets double wheat, which is excessive, but it's just stuff, right? You can always convert stuff. Rachel here, I guess, is also basically looking to kind of close the loop and build her first settlement. I think she's probably not very far away. I'm sure she has the wheat. I didn't quite check in on the wood rolls, so she might be missing a wood. I don't think we've rolled a 4 yet, so she might need to trade for that sheep. And hopefully she'd be willing to trade from Phil. Six. Sure, let's just pile on the wheat for even more. So a lot of wheat has been rolled this game. So talking about that, Phil's turn is just immediately over. Then I think that's often the case with experienced players. Like, you get to a turn where it's like, oh, I didn't get anything. Okay, I guess a die out of the cup is a full reroll. I didn't get anything, so I know exactly what's happening. It's nothing, and I'm done. Ooh, man, 2 here is huge for Phil and Chris. Chris might be able to levy that into a town. I mean, I don't think that he has a wood, but he's got so much wheat that he might be able to just 4-for-1 it. Because he needs to convert that pile of cards in his hand into something else. Is that a 9? Well, Rachel didn't build a settlement, so she might have been looking for that wood. It's a good roll for her. And here's just even more sheep and wheat into the game. Okay, so what I was talking about before about abundance. Obviously, everyone knows that you can look at the pips, right? There's 5 pips on the 6 and 5 pips on the 8, and they're highlighted in red to show how popular they are. In case you're not aware, when you roll 2 dice, there's 36 possibilities, and the 5 pips represent the 5 out of 36 possibilities that you can get to roll a 6. So you can roughly, and this is a bad way to really think about it, but you could get into some dangerous logical fallacies here, but you can roughly count the number of pips and say in 36 turns, that's how many times this resource is going to get rolled. So we've got wheat at 5, 10, 14, 16 pips. So, across, let me make sure I'm saying this right. Across 36 turns, on 16 of them, I'd expect someone at least to get a wheat. And in this board, it's actually more than that, right? Because people are, and that's normal in Catan, because people are multiply surrounding those spaces. So the average amount of wheat that comes in every turn is just absolutely ridiculous. Compare that to, say, something like brick, which has 5, 6, 7, 8 pips. It's going to come in half as often as wheat is, but then also people need to have their houses on those spots, and the 8 brick up there is surrounded by the desert, so even less than that. So yeah, I could actually go into a really long math thing about this. I should stop. Frustrated Phil unfortunately bumps all of his rows as he rolls a 7 into his pile of sheep here. And Chris was indeed able to do exactly as we said and build out a town with that pile of wheat. And this is what, as I understand it, pretty common at higher level play, is that trading is just not as regular. And if trading happens, it tends to be pretty lopsided for the person who's kind of seeking the particular resources. I don't think that players at this skill level very often do 1-for-1 trades, but let's see if that's actually true. I mean, they may have done some trading just kind of on the sly really quickly, people agreeing, but largely it looks like people are just kind of like rolling and going. And I think this aspect of Catan, that it's played very differently from table to table, is a really funny aspect and can be really jarring. If you're playing if you play at a table where folks are really into the trading aspect and they're down to do anything, you can step into a sharkier table and just find yourself completely deadlocked. You think, oh, I'm gonna essentially try to get all my best resources and then move on there. Wow, Phil legitimately just discarded a development card and a brick. That's insane. All right, and so then he picks one player blocking that brick, but there makes sense. But Rachel's not the player who's winning right now, so I think that's an interesting early play. Phil's now moved the robber twice, and not stolen from Brent anytime. And I think Brent's in the best position. Chris is just as many points as him, but his locations are, I think, just cruddier generally. And it looks like that 2 sheep is going to be a wood, which will get him a road. And that 6-2 spot is definitely a decent spot for him. He needs that 6-2 spot because he needs the wheat. Yeah, he needs the wheat. That 7 was a really bad roll for him. That was a really bad roll for him. All right, so I think if Rachel can build a town, she still does build a town, but she must be stopped up on something. Maybe she doesn't have a brick, or maybe what Phil stole from her was pretty crucial. He could have stolen the brick that he used for a road, but he discarded a brick. Looks like that was maybe a development card purchase. I may have missed ones from other players, so we'll try to keep this up to date. But I've also been told that a decent heuristic for counting development cards is that each is a point. That's a little bold. I don't think each is entirely worth a point, but some of them are worth a point straight up. If you have 3 of them, you can get the biggest army, so 2/3 of a point per card. If you have road building, that straight up might get you halfway to the 2 points for road building. Year of Plenty is half the resources that you need to build just about anything. So somewhere between a half a point to a point for every card is about correct. So treating the development cards in that way, or respecting the development cards in that way, I think is valuable. Obviously, it can get a little bit awkward when you draw extra knights, 4th, 5th, 6th knights if you're not competing with anybody. But yeah, and we're seeing Brent get to use essentially his diversification of resources to buy cards and develop, spread out, like build the road, build the settlement there. He's getting to do a lot more there than other players are. And it's so funny that the game is completely stalled on this, like, where do I go with the 7? You can see them kind of like chit-chatting with each other about like who to go after and where to go after folks. It's not any surprise that I think that Brent is kind of the lead threat right now. And so I wonder if the choice was, see, this again, it's not Brent at all. That's an attack that is kind of a weaker attack, right? That on a 10 there, but I guess that wood there really does stymie Phil. It doesn't do too much to Rachel. I mean, it's annoying, certainly, and she keeps kind of getting capped here. She's still sitting on 2 points and hasn't built for all these turns. I think maybe I would have gone on the 4 of ore, stop Brent from getting any rocks, and slow Phil down a little bit. That might have been my choice. Granted, I'm certainly not the best Catan player, but I think I really feel like using the robber to stymie leaders is important. Now, of course, like, points is not just the thing, but I just also think that Brent has a strong board position where he's like making a lot of the resources, and then of course with the 11s that we're rolling here, he's getting a bit lucky. What was that roll? Must have been a 4, because ore and sheep just came out. They're so animated in their conversations right now. It's not even Brent's turn. I wonder if Rachel's considering. Nope, just straight up passes. I am dying to know what she has in her hand, because I've not been. I was thinking of tracking, but clearly that's impossible. I'd have to kind of do this completely separately, I think, both times. By the way, my video here, I know it's blocking Brent's rolls, but and the cards that he's picking up, but so does the video of the commentators. So even if I wasn't here, You would see the same sort of thing. All right. So I think one thing that's actually fascinating about this game is I'm very focused on the board. But I think actually the videos at the top are pretty helpful. Calling a monopoly here on ore is devastating for Phil. He just keeps getting slammed in this game, and Brent is doing it because he knows that I'm sure he's counted essentially roughly how many times certain things have been rolled, especially when you're holding Monopoly. And he doesn't wait. I mean, sometimes people will wait on Monopoly to like get 8 or 10 resources, but he says, nope, if I can levy this right now into a city, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And he gets a city. He buys himself another development card, which puts him up to, I guess we're technically down to 2 here. Puts him up to 4 points, or maybe a phantom 6 points if you want to look at it that way. And you see Chris kind of grab his head there because, yeah, they're just really far behind. If he'd put it on that 4 ore, none of that stuff would have happened. I mean, obviously, that's completely hindsight 2020. He's trying to offer 2 wheat for something. What does he need to do? I guess he needs development cards? Yes, he has such this awkward hand, so he needs ore. All of it just went to Brent, so it doesn't exist anywhere. Yeah, because really all he can buy are those, and then maybe roads, but he's very, very slow on the road path. And now Brent is scooping up 3 wheat a clip. Again, he doesn't have a good port to kind of like put that into. Probably not worth it for him to head down to that port on the left side of the board there, because Phil's very likely to get there before Brent can. So, excuse me. I don't know what he's going to do there. All right, let's take a look at each player and think about what they can do to kind of turn this around. So Chris, we can see his cards. We see that he has a lot of resources. He's rolled a lot of resources. He needs to either buy into some cards, or I think really what I'd like to see him do is try his best to get to that 3, 10, 11 spot. It's going to continue to give him resources that he's already getting, but it also gives him access to some ore, also gives him the possibility of connecting on the road building, which not a lot of other players really have. So that's, I think, Chris's path to victory is kind of cutting that swath in the middle of the board there. The awkward thing is that he doesn't make resources to build a lot of roads. And so either he's going to have to trade his way to that kind of doing that. It seems to be a little bit stuck, stymied, and that makes sense because the resources that are in the board are not, there's not a lot of extra brick there, right? That for players to be using. So how's he going to trade for it? Wood was just blocked on his spot, that 9 there for a while. That 9 robber really hurts Chris. That's definitely something that guts this game plan of his. Okay, so that's Chris, who's still trying to trade here, offering now 3 wheat for whatever it is that he's looking for. You say no to 3? Can't say no to 3. For a wood, a sad wood. What a amazing deal. Phil's playing this game. Phil's got great places to expand to on this board. He just has been slowed down a bit at the beginning of the game. What was that, a wood for a brick maybe? And Phil, I think, needs to expand to that 8-3 spot. He needs to build on the 6-2 spot. So he's got a couple like good-ish, but only 2 of 3 locations because they're on the water. If he can get out there, if he can get to that rock port, it makes a really, really big difference for him. Brent might get in his way before then. I think probably not, because having to do 2 roads is just very difficult. But Brent also has the opportunity of like rolling an 11 and then suddenly having 2 brick. And if he kept a couple wood in hand, he could suddenly just like place 2 roads. He could do that in such a way that he completely cuts off Phil's ore. So Phil's got to be really, really nervous in his position. He can pull out of this. He just needs to get to a lot of places and needs to get a lot of resources before other players do. And there, Brent, oh my God, I swear I did not see this. Brent does exactly what I was just talking about. That is a huge stymie for Phil. And Brent now moves into getting that 8 ore, which is going to allow him to city up across the board. Okay, and then Rachel is the other player that we need to talk about. She's got that the ownership of the brick, and so she needs to kind of like spread out as much as possible, make sure she's building roads into locations. I think she probably flux capacitors, which is my phrase for when you do the kind of like triangle thing, onto the upper right side of the board where that brick port is. It's only a 4 sheep spot, so it's kind of a sad spot, but it lets her turn those 8 rolls into anything she wants to, so she can build up, because that's her problem. She's lacking ore, or she trades a lot with other players. That is her other path for options here, but she doesn't have a lot of great places to build out to. I think that's kind of the problem with her starting place, is she took good resources but doesn't necessarily have as much of a strong long-term plan there. Looks like Rachel's got a development card. Hey, there we go. Phil finally got there. It's probably too little too late for him. Him getting blocked by Brent there is just like really might be a good game for him. Because he doesn't have a lot of other places to go right now. I mean, he still has the infrastructure to build up. Because he's got the 8 rock, 4 rock, 6 wheat. So he's definitely got places to build up still, but yeah, it's not looking good. How does this game end up going for 2 hours? I mean, we're half an hour in, but it just seems like it's gonna snowball at a certain point. What are we thinking about right now? Oh, we're trying to use the knights, and I think blocking Brent with his gazillion cards is 100% the right call. Is that the space that I go to block Brent? Yeah. I mean, he has plenty of wheat because I think they just rolled a 6. And it's not like his wheat production is really stopped. I actually kind of wonder, strangely, if the 11 was maybe a better block. Does that make sense? No, that doesn't make sense, because you're going to roll that 6 twice as often, more than 2.5 times as much as you're going to roll that 11. If you roll it 2.5 times as much, every time you roll it twice, you have 4 wheat, which is anything, right? You can turn it into something else. But having a lot of wheat is risky, right? Because when someone rolls a 7, you might end up discarding half your hand. I might have blocked his brick. It'd be nice to block his wood, but it's just kind of a single there. If he had a city on that 9-4-3 on the bottom side of the board, I would probably block his wood, because he's still looking to build out roads. He's still looking to build out another settlement there, which is exactly what he does. And he buys both a development card and a road there. I don't know that he will ever use that Rockport. He's got plenty of things to do with ore, you know, like he doesn't need to go. He can use the ore to essentially buy settlements, or he can use that, not settlements, to buy cities or development cards. So like, why bother? This is the stage of the game. I mean, maybe even before, where it's very obvious that no one should trade with the person who's leading. Just kind of putting a full embargo on that person, at least, is like what my table Historically, I haven't played Catan in a while, but when we played a bunch, God, more than a decade ago, that's kind of the area where it's like, yep, they're far enough ahead that we're just not trading with that person anymore. And so having to kind of build your own independent ecosystem and economy is really, really crucial. And we saw that Brent really valued that when he did his starting placement, kind of spreading out. Things worked out nicely for him. He got to spread out faster than other players and then just kind of steamrolls from there. I think that's one of the aspects of this game that, like it or love it, right? Like, you get more as you build more, and that can be really exciting. The game end comes at you faster than the beginning, but the players who have nice starts really are gonna just be farther ahead. They're gonna have more options, and so there can be a logic in this game of, well, if you're lucky early and I'm lucky later, it's gonna kind of even out. But oftentimes when someone's lucky early because they build more, you can be put in a situation like Phil is, where anything that happens for Phil happens for like Brent almost as well. And it makes it very tough to break parity there. I think that Chris is the only potential contender on this board right now. Double development card. That's really fun. Can only see like half the die rolls, but that's a pretty hilarious run of resources for Phil to get. Oh, and he's got a city. I missed that. I'm doing a bad job here. Oh, he didn't buy 2 development cards. He built a city. Dummy. He used the 2 sheep as the extra rock. That makes sense. Yeah, there we go. Flux capacitor. Rachel is the master of all buildings or settlements. She has another one in place. I just mean that she has the most settlements of anyone on the board. But the impact of that settlement is teensy. Phil's city was a lot more exciting than that, I would say. If I'm Chris, that development card that I'm praying for, I mean, Monopoly's always good, but one of them is out of the deck right now. You don't especially hope for Robber, I think. You always hope for Victory Point. I think he'd be plenty happy with road building. I'm gonna assume that Brent didn't roll a 7, but that he actually used a knight. Yeah, it looks like you can just see off the corner of my screen there that he used a knight to go ahead and move off that 6, just shove him over onto the other side of the board. And he is respecting, I guess, Phil's position the most with the wheat port on the 5, or sorry, sheep port on the 5. But also, I think it just shows that there aren't a ton of places that his opponents kind of share with each other that can be attacked. The 10 would be the most resource heavy option, but I think just kind of indicating that doesn't really value the wood a ton. This game, that's not really, there's not a ton extra you can do with wood at this point, because brick is the choke point in the road building, settlements building side of the game. Whereas the sheep, with the sheep port, they can do something a little bit extra, I think. What are you hoping for, Phil? Yeah, I mean, this is really tough because Phil wants to roll like 2s. 2's the exciting thing. And then I guess a 10. If he rolls a 2 and a 10, he gets to build 2 roads and then kind of decide where to go from there. I don't know where he wants to go, though. I mean, maybe he'd build up to around the island for another 5 sheep spot. Seems bad. I think this is another aspect of this game, by the way, that once you are falling behind, players should get a little bit more loose with trading with each other And Phil and Chris, we saw, just made a pretty quick trade there, 1-for-1 resource, allowing Phil to build another city. I think maybe building on the 5 for the sheep port, even though it's blocked right now, could have been the more exciting option. But I guess by going on the wheat spot there, he's sort of making it very likely that he's going to build that third city anyway. Because as soon as the 6 gets rolled, he gets the wheat that he needs, and he's already most of the way there with the rock. So 1 more 4, 8. I can see that. That makes sense to me. And just acknowledging that robber is there for an indeterminate amount of time. It's not like Chris just had his turn and he could have flipped his card up if he had a robber baron, or the knight, sorry, if he had a knight. So presumably Chris does not have a knight as his development card. I do really appreciate that Rachel spends a lot of her turns in the trading, and maybe they're talking, but I feel like from my perspective, it's like she thinks about it, looks at it, folds up her hand, puts it down. I'm done. For once, people do not have a crazy amount of resources. Oh, it looks like Brent does, so he's about to discard half his hand. Oh yeah, he's discarding a ton of cards. They've rolled a couple 6s, I think, so I think he's sitting on just a bunch of wheat, even though he bought a card last turn. And somehow, amazingly, Brent and Phil actually have the same score. That's hilarious. I think that really speaks to Phil's kind of starting placement on that 8-4-10 being really valuable. And clearly I was wrong about the 5-2 sheep port. Enough 5s were rolled that essentially they just kind of became what they wanted. That sheep port became really valuable. It gave Phil options that he would not have had otherwise. And had Phil not necessarily been blocked and then rolled at 7 earlier in the game, he might be in a really, really different position right now. So fascinating to see Brent's. I always love when people's later settlements become their cities. So he puts it on the side of the board there, or the bottom of the board there, because he sees the 8 and is like, great, Ore is the place where I want to be. When you roll some 8s and 6s, I'm basically most of the way towards the cities that I want to keep building. And he's got kind of the settlements out there to build all the cities out. So why not? Pulling back into the lead there. Further, I mean, he can just end up buying a bunch of development cards. We already know that he has 1 knight card, but he might have multiple, and that could be the 2 points right there for the largest army. We have rolled a lot of 9s this game. I feel like 9 is, while it is a common number, I feel like my personal impression is that 9 is rolled a disproportionate amount of times. So everyone except for Phil is sitting on extra wood because of those 9s. Is that a robber exactly on 7? Ooh, nice, Rachel. Perfect timing. And I did comment on this, but you saw that Brent sort of really respected Phil's position as the second place player here by throwing on the 2 brick, just saying, you know what, this actually allows you to change your game in just such a fundamental way that I'm going to block this almost never rolled spot. It doesn't matter for long, as Rachel's going to go ahead and put it in a spot that I think is quite obvious. It's a very good spot for Brent. It's a very good spot for Phil. As far as Rachel and Chris are concerned, that robber could live there for the rest of the game. I don't see really a better spot for opponents that are clearly in just such a strong position. I mentioned earlier, but let's go back to the concept of snowballing in Settlers of Catan, right? So in this game, points are buildings. In this game, buildings get you resources. Getting resources gets you points. And so that sort of the early start, I mean, I commented on like Phil getting hit twice at the beginning of the game, through just kind of acts of God and so on and so forth. And that really stymieing him. Looking at the way the board is right now, like suppose that didn't happen, Brent doesn't get to build the double roads that block Phil. Phil builds a road out to that port right there, the rock port where Brent's got his city now. Brent has to figure out somewhere else to put his roads that's maybe not as good. And Brent here using those development cards to just immediately kind of push out. He then basically goes for the vengeance play of going to Rachel, even though Phil is kind of his main competitor. He sees that Rachel's maybe about to score a 5th point, and also, putting it on a 2 just does not feel like the best thing in the world. That must have been another 6 piles of wheat here. I feel like Rachel has been targeted a fair amount this game. People are really respecting that brick spot or wanting to block that brick spot. For, I think, pretty reasonable reasons, right? Like, it's the one brick spot on the board that kind of creates things. So you're enthusiastic about blocking that location, but I don't think that Rachel's leading. And I think even like extra brick, well, I guess extra brick, every 8 roll is any resource for her, so I should certainly consider that. Here's an 11. I mean, dream of dreams, Brent. I don't think we've rolled the box cars yet. Not that it matters, no one's there. I don't think we've rolled a lot of 3s. Brent's the one who cashes in on the sheeps there. Some 4s, definitely a lot of 5s, definitely 6s, definitely 8s, 9s. 10 has not been another great option, which I think has been a little tough for Chris because he's on the double sheep there. I mean, double sheep isn't going to be a dream for him, but even still. And he is trying so hard to trade. Give me anything. And I do think that trading with the player who is losing and giving them reasonable trades if it's good for you is fine. But I think that Chris just doesn't have anything to offer people that they want. Chris buying a development card. He's offering 3 wood for something, probably to buy another development card is my guess. Yeah, he's trying to get an ore. Yeah, and it's hard to trade for ore because ore lets you buy those development cards, it lets you build up those cities, which are kind of those like late game, hey, I don't have anywhere else to build out to. Like Rachel's got somewhere to build out to, Chris has got somewhere to build out to. Brent's got somewhere to build out to too, and he's going to on his next turn, I'm sure. Here, let's have piles more wheat. Phil's very sad about it. Even though he gets 2 wheat, he's so unhappy. I mean, what are you gonna do, right? Like, you can be as slick and good at this game as you like, but at the end of the day, you are rolling dice at the beginning of your turns, and what happens at the beginning of the game is so impactful. Seven. That's nice for Rachel. I think that I think I stand by Chris is just really struggling. Like, he does have the potential kind of to bow out, but there were a lot of turns ago where I said it'd be nice if he could build to that 3, 10, 11. And I get why he didn't. Like, he couldn't. He didn't have the resources. He didn't have the right resources. It's very, very difficult to just trade into roads if you don't have either of those resources. Because his wood was blocked for a few turns at the beginning of the game. And he's just slow now, but he does have the potential of scoring more points, right? And Phil, who's sitting on 5 and could certainly go to 6, I think quite soon, quite reasonably, is struggling with the issue of like, what does he do after that? He could slowly build roads in a direction, but he's bad at building roads. He could, buy development cards until he gets there, but like ultimately, like he does need another settlement. He's not going to get 4 points off of cards, and that is really, really slowing him down. Rachel has the opposite problem. She's spread out. She can keep spreading out. It's not going as quickly, I think, as she would quite like. Certainly some of that is getting robbed a few times. The uniqueness of that 8 brick spot certainly making her target. But the thing she's really struggling with is getting the rocks and wheat to build those cities, right? Having even one city would be really, really nice for her. Certainly, I think it would go on the 843 location because she needs more rocks so that she can continue to build more cities. And she only bought the one development card. It's just so much harder for her to get rocks than everyone else. And I think that's one of the reasons why, when I mentioned at the beginning of the game that I would take Phil's spot. And I think generally people like that. I don't think I'm special or unique in that I'm saying that I value ore, I think, more than the average person. Nope, not the average person. Just most players I think are average, like, value ore. Let's do a quick score audit here. I think we're good. I feel like these players have been largely playing pretty quickly. I mean, it stops every once in a while, like where we're having these debates right here where they're trading something clearly. 2 for 1, I think. It certainly slows down in those moments, but largely I think the players have played quite quickly. All right, let's see what the numbers are that allow players to get things when Brent doesn't as the leader. Because here we go with 2 more roads. Oh, and he builds those 2 roads and he gets the longest road card. So we'll say +2. That puts him at 8. If he has another robber knight, he'd flip it right now because he'd win. So clearly he's only got the 2. But here's some brick to replace for those roads you just built. Salt in the wound. And now at this point, it's very, very difficult for Chris to take longest roads. Really difficult for anyone to take longest road. Because Brent's sitting on 6 roads. And Chris can build a lot more than that. But he needs to build 3 roads to do that. Wow, did Chris really just put the robber on his own spot? I mean, good for him for stealing a brick. Why wouldn't you put it on the brick location? That's so interesting. I guess he's worried about Brent building up and he himself doesn't need the wheat. He really needed the brick, which is why he stole there. But, like, I don't know, put it on the 3 sheep. Because that counts like it's 8 pips, which is almost, right, because it's 2 pips times 4, which is the number of resources Brent would get on it. And that's almost as much as the wheat spot, which is 10 pips, right? 5 times 2 for the city. I wouldn't shoot myself in the foot. Like, Chris still needs to win, right? It's nice. It's all good and nice to stop the player who's winning, but Chris still needs to win. This isn't like some, home game where it's like, I'll just try my best to stick it to this guy. I know I'm toast, even though I know Chris is toast. He's still got to try for it, right? He is begging for that brick right now. I do think that a component of their negotiations, just from the way they're talking, is about what's being built, what's being done. I think that might be an interesting part about watching this game, is just like hearing what it is that they are going back and forth about. But I try not to listen to their audio while it's going, because 1, it can be very distracting, and 2, is that what he's offering for a brick? Oh, he's buying an ore. Maybe he couldn't. Yeah, he probably couldn't get anyone to give him the ore. So he decides he's going to buy a development card instead. And this is interesting. I think the other players are motivated for Chris to buy development cards, because if Brent gets out of the night, it's game over. So that's actually something where you do want to facilitate players getting exactly that thing, because if Chris draws night, and he gets to 3 nights before Brent gets to 3 nights, all of a sudden the players have a lot more breathing room to continue playing the game. There's that number that I was saying is really good for the table. 10 is good for everyone but Brent. A bunch of 10s can slow this game down. Obviously, having a bunch of the same resources is not the most powerful thing, but it does do something. Trading a wood for a sheep here. Chris is just doing a nice 1-for-1 because he knows he needs the wood. The wood in the long run. I still think he's going to be stymied on the brick, so he's being nice considering Phil has not made his life very easy, I think, throughout the course of this game. And there he goes with what looks like 2 development cards, but instead are actually a city, thanks to that sheep port. And Phil is at essentially what I would argue as maximum capacity. So now Phil needs to figure out where to go from here. Development cards are a little bit more likely to be a bust because he's probably not going to win the night race. So drawing knights suddenly becomes quite the dud. That doesn't mean you're going to stop buying them, because he would still like to buy into something like road building or just a victory point, right? But I do think that he needs to build a 4th settlement so he can build a 4th city. So he's got to ask himself, where can I go that's relatively safe for doing that? And unless he can do it quite abruptly, I think the only place that's really safe is down or up north along the sheep coast. It's just really awkward. I mean, admittedly, a sheep spot is a half of any resource for him, so it's not the worst. But building a settlement on one location like that is very, very sad. This isn't even that blocked up of a board. I mean, Chris really threw a big wrench in everyone's plans, I think, when he placed on that 6-5-11, because you can see that he's like 3 spaces away from Brent, and then Rachel placed diagonal to that 3 spaces away there. So that right side of the board is very crappy to build on, because there just aren't spaces that aren't blocked off. Whereas the left side of the board, the players have really done a lot more of the two spaces minimum they've kind of held to. I wonder if that's what Chris was thinking when he went to that spot, like if he was intentionally trying to make it difficult over there. Okay, well, I could see why this game slows down, because they start getting into some much more complex negotiations, and then poor bored Brent, who no one wants to trade with, is just hanging out. I wonder if he even tries to get into the milieu every once in a while. Like, he doesn't even seem, he's not holding his cards, he's not offering anything, he doesn't seem to be engaged in any of these conversations. Generally, that's, I think, the problem with Catan, is that the leader gets very bored. I do like that Chris reveals his cards. He's offering a trade. I do think it makes it very clear what is being offered and what the options are. He's got to be trying to haggle his way for a brick right now. I don't think there's anything else he cares about. Yeah, they are certainly colluding about how can we slow down Brent, which they've got to. If they don't take either the largest army or the longest road from him, they're toast, right? So taking both is even better. Even if they take both, Brent still probably is in the best position, because he has the most places to expand out to. Like, he's got a location where he can place a settlement right now, tons of places where he can place decent cities. And not only that, but he's got another place with one road he can get another settlement up there by that wood port. Looks like they hit a stalemate in negotiations. Well, if Brent keeps rolling sevens when he's got a pile of cards in his hand. Oh, not quite enough. And he goes straight for the sheep port spot. That makes sense. I mean, I think that 5 is... He's bounced around a couple spots, but I think that 5 spot is the best spot for him to be attacking. Another road there, I guess, just gives him extra safety. A little bit awkward. I guess it also guarantees that that Phil can't like build 2 roads into that corner and then suddenly like build a settlement, something sneaky like that. Collect a bajillion sheep, please, sir. At least Rachel gets an ore. She was happy about that. The way that Chris is flipping out these knights, I mean, he may or may not have the 3rd one underneath there, but certainly he'd want a reveal because he wants to be able to threaten it and also move off of that spot in order to head over to the rock there. And now if I'm in Chris's position here, I'm saying like, look, I need to get an extra knight. If you guys want me to stop Brent, I have these resources. I need an ore. That or give me... He's counting up his roads 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He's pointing out that with 2 roads he can't get there. So get me ore, y'all. And Rachel is saying, yeah, I can trade you ore, but like I don't want to. It's what I need. I'm at maximum 5 settlements. I really, really need this ore. It's all good and fine if players manage to stop Brent, but if she can't win, what's she supposed to do with that? If you can see why this game slows down. Let me see if I can check in on their audio for a quick moment. Yeah, he's basically offering 1 for 3s, 1 for 3s. Yeah, definitely just like kind of in a very crafty way, I think, colluding with the other players. This is something I don't personally love about Catan. It becomes this sort of like semi co-op experience where players are like trying to decide how much they want to help each other because you really have to help yourself. I think people do really like that, but I find it that the games when they like drag on like this, like if I'm sitting in Brent's position, I'm very bored right now. And he doesn't have anything to think about. I mean, you see him just kind of staring into the distance, like there's nothing for him to do. And Phil and Rachel very reasonably are trying to kind of like protect their resources. They need to win the game as well. And Chris, who's behind, is trying to get as much value as he can out of it. So you just kind of hit these like impasses where someone has to be like, nope, do something or pass the dice. And that just becomes a very, very awkward thing because it's the person whose turn it is that gets to kind of make that call about when we go next. No one seems to be willing to help Chris out. This is one of those examples where you see, man, it would be nice to be on a port, but is he going to trade that 4 for 1, 4 wood for an ore so he can then buy a development card? I think the answer is, well, I mean, if he doesn't stop Brent, he loses in terms of like getting a knight, right? If he doesn't have a knight underneath that card there, but he's going to struggle to win, I think, even without. Holding the resources though has that situation. I mean, this is why I think the 7 rule exists, so people don't just hoard resources and have some crazy turn later. So he ends up making the full trade for it, because if Chris had just kept them all, then he could, then like it goes around the table and really he gets over 7 resources, rolls a 7, discards half of his hand. That's substantially worse than trading the 4 for 1. We're up to 4 developments here, yeah. A 5 there opens up options for Phil. I mean, basically, it's a resource. I think he has some other sheep that he's holding in his hand. He's holding kind of a decent grip there. 4 or 5 cards. I think if it was a development card, he'd buy that. But I think the other option for him is he's building roads out onto the sheep area. I do think he really needs to get a 4th location. That being said, it looks like he can't do anything. Kind of awkward to pass with 5 cards in your hand at the end of your turn. I think it's very dangerous, especially when you're in 3 cities. Is that a 7 roll? Is that a ton of discards for Rachel? Oh no. Some wood went out there. So it must have been a 9. Rachel was really holding on to that ore. She has all sorts of ports. So I think we're about to see her turn in a lot of 3 for 1s. I respect buying a development card because I don't see how many cards she has in her hand, but I think that if I was in her position, I would have done a bunch of trades to make sure that I built a city. I think cities for her because she needs them so that she can ultimately build another settlement. And she's got her little flux capacitor thing over there. On the bottom side of the board, but doesn't do anything. I don't know if she had the resources for it, but if she did, I really think that building a city would have been the way to go. Oh, she has 3 cards left after using 4 wood. So, because she has a 3 for 1, she probably was a little bit shy. But there must have been a wheat she could have traded to for someone. I don't know. Maybe not must have, but it's kind of funny that she's rolling all this wheat right now. Bunch of 5s. 5s are really bad for Brent. 10s and 5s. Those multiples of 5s are the numbers they don't want to see. We saw that Brent didn't really do anything there except for extend the road network. I think it's to threaten building on that spot too, if Rachel doesn't do it, because getting that wheat port is very good for him. Much better than placing on the 8 rock spot, which is always going to be blocked. So it kind of lets him turn the corner. I do wonder how much Brent considered like buying a development card or trading into buying for a development card if he had the resources, given that Chris has 2 face down cards. Does he say like, do I really want to contest knight when Chris is the first one that gets to flip a card up here? I think he then instead focuses on the points that he can certainly get on the board or sort of maintain at the 8 points that he has here, this kind of stalemate that we have. And I think that if Chris had the knight, I guess he doesn't need to reveal, because until Brent buys another development card, you're not too concerned about it. So you're happy to leave that robber baron blocking Brent and Phil in the space you wanted to block Brent and Phil. I get it. So we don't know if Chris has a knight or not. Well, he's got something else. Is that a monopoly on sheep? Oh, that was a lot of 5s rolled. Oh. Poor Phil. He's been monopolized a lot this game. Well, twice is the most he can be monopolized, but he's been kind of the primary loser in both of those situations. Okay, so now Chris he picked up like 9 sheep or something like that. But, essentially that's 2 resources because he doesn't need the sheep for anything. I think he can at least leverage this stuff into building a settlement. If it's actually 9 sheep that he picked up, that's a sheep plus 2 any other resource, and he must have a wheat. So I feel like Chris builds a settlement here. maybe he continues to be concerned about Brent ending the game with flipping a third knight. So he says, look, I really have to build a development card. And that's fine, but you still have to win the game yourself at some point. And you still need to kind of just hope to get a little bit lucky. Yeah, I think you still build the settlement. He does exactly that. Okay. He's still holding the grip. Now, if he can afford a development card, great. That's a rock. There we go. There you're done. That was a really good turn for Chris. That was a really good monopoly. Let him kind of finish what he was trying to do. He is sitting at 4 points now, which is still, miles away. But decent chance that he drew a knight there that would put him at 6 points. He can ultimately contest longest road, but he's a ways away. He's got 4, and then if he connects 5, and Brent's got 8, so he's a long, long way away from longest road. That's like a pipe dream, but if this game ends up going for a zillion years, I suppose that could be something that happens. It wouldn't be what I was focusing on. Brent must have no cards in hand for him to steal from Chris. Or I guess he really values having the sheep. It's just kind of like focusing on his own thing. I don't know. I still steal from Brent. A 10. Got it. 10. Yeah. 5s and 10s. Bad rolls for Brent. I'd say like it's been a slow go for him with lots of 5s and 10s in the past few rounds, but obviously when you have an explosive beginning, you can't be too unhappy about the rolls not going in your favor. This 7's not the most exciting for Brent, but he gets to get it off one of his whatever spaces, I suppose. And I think he chooses Chris as a target because Phil doesn't have the resources that he needs, and also Chris has a higher ceiling. What I mean by that is that even though Chris is losing, the fact that he can get the knight thing there, he's at 6 points. The fact that he can connect those roads and threaten, the fact that he can build his settlements up into cities, the fact that he can build roads somewhere to build another settlement. He just has a lot more options, right? He's got a higher ceiling of options than Phil does, who's got the one plan, right? They'll like build another settlement. Did he just pass the machine? Did they just trade? Did I miss a trade between Brent and someone else? Put it on. That's 2 5s in a row. Yo, hats off to the GM of this game. He's been doing a lot more work than some of the GMs here have to do. It's funny too. I don't know. Does Settlers have rules about what you're allowed to discuss in trading? Let's find out. Trade. You may trade freely. Trade resource cards. You can announce which resources you need. Okay, so it must have been, if anything, they have like social rules that they might have released for this specific tournament. I wonder what they were. Just because, like, what's the extent of what players are allowed to talk about, I think is interesting. You see Phil's building the road out there. Like I said, it's the one place where he can go. It is very unlikely, I think, that Chris is going to stop him from doing any of that stuff. It's too much effort for not enough payoff for him. I guess that being said, like, ultimately in the long run, Chris might want to build a 5th settlement. He doesn't need to. That's not, I think at this point he wants to build up rather than out, because building out has been so painful for him. If anything, he wants to maybe threaten Longest Road, but again, he's so far away from it. It just doesn't seem worth it. But racing Phil at this stage when you're already behind, it's not a good proposition. Phil's sheep port and city on the sheep just kind of gives him better options there. The robber sitting on that 8 ore has certainly stymied Brent's mobility and progress, but it's impressive that he hasn't managed to build a settlement in ages. I mean, part of that certainly is because he kept building roads out there, and I'm sure he could have built a settlement if he had built some fewer roads. But then he would kind of have a sort of cruddy settlement. I think to go way, way, way back in time, when Brent chose to build that city on that ore, I think we can see in retrospect that was potentially a mistake. It just made a spot that was so juicy of a target for the other players that that city has ended up essentially being a dud for him. Whereas if he played it on the 493 spot, it touches more pips, first of all, so he just would be getting more resources. And I think he's functionally needed the wood, right, for building the roads and things like that, building up settlements and things like that, because he only makes 1 wood a turn. And again, I see at the time why he built on that 8. It's nice to get the rocks coming in really quickly so you can build up your cities, and that enables you to then build up on the 943. But the players then kind of banded together. Brent maybe thought that he had some defense with his knights, and they just didn't last for long. Trading, I think, does expand later in the game for a couple of reasons. I mean, one obviously is, you know who is maybe safer to trade with based on the scores and what you want to accomplish with those things. We've already kind of talked about the collusion of the players. But also players tend to have a lot more resources, and you tend to have a lot more gluts in your hand of certain kinds, and you see people holding 5, 6, 7 resources, maybe of types that seem kind of like duds. 3 here, big role for Chris and Rachel, but 4 sheep gives Brent options, right? 4 sheep is anything. If he doesn't roll 7 before then. I assume that Phil's going to build another road here. Oh, no, he's going on development card. So he could have built another road. Yeah, but then I don't think he could have built a settlement with those cards. So He buys 2 development cards. Why not? Get some options. Get you some options. It's a bummer for him when he rolls knights, right? Like, they do not do a ton of work for him right here. And he doesn't really want to put it back on that 8 space. Like, it's his spot too. Chris and Rachel both haven't flipped their development cards that have existed for a little bit. So I think it's reasonable to assume that they are victory points at this stage. So we're looking at like Chris actually being in second place. That's truly impressive. What were those resources for? Oh, did she roll 7? Yep, she rolled a 7. I feel like that discard that you just saw, sheep. Getting pretty late. Sheepwood wheat is so common, right? Because sheepwood wheat don't build anything together. You need those, what I call the hard resources, brick or ore, in order to build anything. And those are the resources that only have 3 tiles on the board. So they often become those kind of stopper resources. I still think going on Brent's 8 might have been the way to go. Maybe Rachel is respecting Chris's position for what it is, points wise. I mean, still, even just like income wise, infrastructure wise, he's a little bit lower. Let's actually count. Let's check in on what people's raw production pippage is. So what I'm going to do is let's start with Rachel. So we're going to start from the top of the board, or left side of the board, screen left, but the top of the board. So that settlement all the way at the top there is on an 8. That's 5 pips. The settlement right below that on the 843 is 5 pips and 3 pips and 2 pips. So that's plus 10. So we're at 15 total. So then if I go to the little crappy settlement above that, it's 18 total, hopping all the way to the right side of the board. 22, 26, 29, 33. So Rachel's got 33 pippage. And obviously I'm going to count double for cities. So we're going to do the guys with cities last. Let's hop over to Chris. His pip situation is 4, 7, 8, 11, 15, 17, 19, 22, 27, 31, 33. 33 pips for Chris. So I think I said Rachel's was at 35 maybe or something like that. Either way, they're very, very similar, despite the fact that Chris has fewer settlements, because so many of Rachel's are on the outsides of the board. Let's go to Phil's. I'm going to start with his resources on the bottom here, and I'm going to count double for all of them because he's got cities everywhere. So he's got 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 times 2 puts him at 10, plus another 2 is 12, plus another 10 is 22, plus another 10 is 32, plus another 6, and 6 is 44 pips for Phil. And then for Brent, we're looking at 5, 6, 7, starting from the bottom of the board, 8, 9, 13, 15, double for that city, 25 plus 4, 29. And then let's go up top, 39 plus 8, 47. So actually pip-wise, Brent is just barely eking out Phil, which makes sense. They both have 6 raw points of value on the board. It is just that Brent has the longest road to put him up to 8 victory points. And then immediately rolls an 8. That's what the high 5 was for. Hey, there we go. Another one. This is really nice for Rachel as a player who is, I think, certainly behind and a little bit more limited potential. So she can now convert those. I mean, first of all, she might trade those bricks for some decent value for other players, but she also can trade those bricks 2-to-1, and so she can start building a city, which is really what she needs to do. Chris is just continuing to hammer on this development card thing. I can't see if Brent like flipped a third or fourth knight, if that's what he's doing, or if he's just kind of fishing for points or fishing for a road building, which would be huge for him. Maybe not huge. Actually, I mean, maybe because he's so far away in roads, that's not what he cares about. Maybe he's just trying to buy for points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think that's the 7th, actually. So I was wrong about Rachel having a point in hand. I still think Chris does, though, because that one's been out there for a really, really long time. Yeah, Rachel has really slid into last year. I think it's because of the fact that she's unable to build cities. She's just completely stymied. She doesn't have anything really to do. She also keeps kind of getting hosed on like when 7s are rolled, where she has like a glut of cards in her hand. But I think she's also in a situation where it's like she can't really convert things very well. Even though she's sitting on all these ports, she probably has these hands with these like awkward number of things. And I think that's something about the settlement strategy versus the city strategy. You tend to get your resources here and there and here and there, and it's less likely that you're going to have all the same. Whereas with cities, double up your resources, you're less likely to have a diversity of resources, but you will be able to trade in more often. And I think that that is something that can make a big difference. And I think that's what we're seeing with Rachel's gameplay here. Not gameplay, game plan. Gameplay is just fine, but she's just stymied. Phil's thinking for a really long time here. I don't know if he's considering his development cards or he's just trying to, he really needs a wheat and was willing to trade away a brick for it. That's cool for Chris. He likes that. That, I think, is a year of plenty. 2 resources of your choice. So he must be building a road and a settlement. I think it's pretty funny that they use that payment board, even though like they have a GM who's like counting all their cards and everything. All right. Raw points on board. Phil pulls into the lead in theory. This game got a lot closer. They have done a decent job of making sure that Brent doesn't cross the finish line. Part of it's 5s and 10s. Part of it's the robber always being on the 8. Does she roll another 7? That's truly impressive. It feels like rolling a 7 is good, right? You get to steal a resource from a player. You always get a resource. But I think at this stage in the game, you're really hoping to roll something that is like more like your number, right? Like in Rachel's case, it is an 8. That being said, I think it really only is an 8. Like 9 is best for her, but because kind of the way her settlements are splayed out, there aren't a lot of numbers that you roll that are like, oh, this is definitely better for me than it is for other players. You know, like she wants to be rolling 3s, but like, does she really? Because 4 sheep for Brent, ugh. I wonder if she was considering whether she wanted to go after Phil, you know, like attack that sheep spot rather than the wheat spot for Brent. Because now a couple 5s and Phil is very, very dangerous all of a sudden. Rachel buys a third development card. I don't think development cards is where she needs to be going. I think that she really needs to be building a city. And I realize that she probably doesn't have the resources to make that happen, but I think building to that, because she's not gonna get here on the back of development points. She keeps flipping knights too. Is that her fourth one then? Because she just flipped one. She's just trying to remember what Phil has in hand. I mean, if you don't know, you don't know, right? I would not be tracking at that level, I don't think. It's too many. I'm generally of the opinion that spending too many brain cycles on like memorizing people's positions just makes you play worse. And I'd rather focus on playing very well and not use my brainwaves on memorizing other people's positions. That being said, like there are some games where you really need to know more. In this game, if you draw Monopoly, you really need to start paying attention. Acquire, which, you know, Phil and Chris were both in, is a game that really requires you to pay attention to at least a couple pieces of information. If you can have all of it, it's a really big advantage, as we saw in the videos that I did before. 4 is a funny roll here because Brent does really need the ore, but seeing Phil get more ore is kind of scary. That being said, I think the extra 2 sheep pushes it over the edge of, yep, that's a good roll. Just passes his turn because he's got no resources. I will say, I think that Catan is maybe not. Now that I'm like going through this is like I think one of the videos that I've done that if you've stuck with me this far, like kudos to you, because I think that this is not the most exciting game to watch or commentate on. There's only so much that can be happening at this stage of the game. Like you're rolling resources, people maybe are going to try to trade and like hustle for the thing. People are going to say no. They're going to move on to the next turn. Oh my god. Why flip another knight? Does he really need a resource of a certain type? I don't think he's threatened. I think you can only flip 1 knight per turn. I think. Maybe I'm making that roll up. Yeah. And so we're at this stage now where it's like they roll, they have something to do. You know, Chris every turn is trying to figure out some angle. Like respect for him, he's always hustling. But for us watching, like, you know, he's gonna build something or he isn't. I think that knight flip is really interesting. He really did seem to desperately need something. Is he still angling on this row plan? I don't think it's going to happen, man. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, he blocks the brick, basically saying, okay, well, if I block the brick, maybe Brent will never have roads. And, I mean, really, that hurts Brent because he can't build a settlement either, which is the thing that's getting in his way. You know, for however often 11s get rolled. He's got tons of road building spaces. No one's going to stop you from building around that desert, my friend. I traded for the thing, so you must know what he's doing. Phil must have really also needed a wheat because he was willing to trade away a sheep, which is half a resource for him, half of any resource for him, for a wheat. So, I mean, first of all, he's facilitating what Chris is doing. But also, I imagine that wheat allows him to build the things that he wants to build. So Chris goes in on the road plan. Do I like this? I don't think I... Well, what else does he do? He has the 2 brick. I wonder if it would have made more sense for him to just like build the 1 road, keep his cards, and move on to the next turn. I mean, maybe he's just too scared of rolling a 7, but I don't think he makes that many resources that he definitely needed to like trade away his wheat and turn in 4 sheep for a thing. It seemed like a lot. Now Brent's frustrated. He needs a moment. Phil buying up those development cards. I do think development cards are just a victory point for him. Like, I suppose... Nope, road building doesn't do anything for him. He is literally boxed in everywhere. Yeah, road building is garbage. Monopolies are gone. Year of Plenty would be fine, but he just traded 3 resources for the 2 resources you'd use in Year of Plenty. He's just searching for a victory point. Fist Pump there, I assume, is an 11? Oh, no, it's a 10. Oh, it's a 10 because it's a pile of resources for not Brent. 5s and 10s, 5s and 10s. It is pretty funny that I know that Brent ends up winning this game because it certainly feels like the theme is that Brent gets there and just totally stalls out, and then you can see that's almost what it feels like is like fated to happen at this stage. Okay, that is a 5th one. All right, I thought that she might have had another. Like slows to a complete halt. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so actually any 2 more roads. Yeah, 2 more roads gets them there. I was saying I wasn't sure about it before. I think he could have just done the 1 road probably still, but I get it. You know, building the 2 roads into the desert here gives him an option to build a settlement for a point, which, you know, there are not really a lot of places on the board where you can still do that. Which in the long run he needs to do if he wants to win. It could be his last point, right? If he takes longest road,